We live. Let me just check both the feeds if we are streaming, and we can get started. Okay. Yes. We can get started. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining all of us on a Saturday evening with SciRio. My name is Suchita Champak, and I'm the founder of SciRio. And SciComm Souls is our first live chat show with science communicators in India. The main objective of this show is to highlight and, in fact, tease out how unique and different journeys of science communicators are and how they're making it by themselves. And to only inspire more science communicators to join the bandwagon, right? So also to give a brief introduction about SciRio for whoever are new to our platform. SciRio is a place where we are building enterprise, where we are building an ecosystem for capacity building and exploring newer opportunities for science communicators and building in collaboration and in full support for science communicators and going through with the system. Right, so I have Shweta Hegde today as our co-host. So she is doing her bachelor's at the Regional Institute of Education at Mysore, and we have Sidharth as our guest, who's going to be introduced by Shweta. Go on, Shweta.
Okay, thanks, Suchita. So to formally introduce Sidharth, he is a science communication practitioner and researcher working at NCBS, and is also founder of the SciCommSci club, about which he would talk later on. Sidharth spends his time exploring the research practice continuum within science communication, he also contributes to mentorship, capacity building, and diversity, equity, and inclusivity efforts, and developing intersectional science engagement practices for the Global South. With that, welcome, Sidharth. Super excited to have you here.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's lovely to be here. Hi.
Yes, Sidharth, thank you for joining us. So let us into your world a little bit on how you started off and how you decided that science communication is your calling. Give us a little insights.
Right. I think like most science communicators in India or abroad, I think my sort of journey in science communication was quite serendipitous. I was studying a research degree at the Indian Institute of Science, and I was sort of contributing to research efforts, and somehow I didn't feel like it was really me. I kind of didn't enjoy it as much as I wanted, and this was when I always wanted to be a researcher when I was growing up. So after coming to ISC, I sort of got like a very sort of close experience with what entails in research. And somehow I did not enjoy sort of going into the depth of one topic as much as I wanted the breadth of different topics. So science communication was basically a chance event in my life where I was taking a break after my degree at ISC, and I was home, and I was someone who was always interested in science and humanities both. And in school also, I always sort of wanted to study everything, but I couldn't. So I think that this dichotomy between science and humanities or science and social science is something which is not really helpful in the Indian education system. So, I mean, and we can talk about it later. But so I was always interested in humanities, but I was really sort of interested in biology within sciences. So I always kept pursuing sciences, and one step after the other, I kept taking a higher degree or higher course in biology, and somehow I differentiated into science. After my course at ISC, I sort of felt like I wanted to sort of get in touch back with humanities, and because writing and these kind of things are something I always enjoyed even as a student, and I was always involved in my college newsletters and magazines and all that kind of activities. So after I finished my course at ISC, I sort of wanted to take a few months off to just take a sabbatical and take a break and reflect on what I wanted to do. And science communication happened by chance, and I started sort of, foraying into science journalism and science writing. And I started networking a lot on social media, and this is something we can talk about later. And then I soon found sort of not very sort of properly defined jobs, but jobs in science communication in India. And I decided to join a science communication job, and the rest is history, as they say. So, yeah.
Okay, awesome. So a lot of people know you better as the founder of the SciCommSci Club. So tell us a little bit about how you conceived the idea and how it's going so far.
Right. So when I started working in my first science communication job, it was at Guppy Labs in Bangalore. I was sort of doing a lot of science communication practice. So I was engaging with different ways of communicating science, including podcasts, videos, infographics, and social media and websites and writing and interviewing people. And so I really had an opportunity to sort of explore different formats of SciComm without really just sticking to one for an extended period of time. So in that exploratory phase of my career where I was still not sure about what I wanted to do, it was a great opportunity for me to be able to do all of these things on a fairly regular basis, but sort of mix it up a little bit. But after I started doing this I worked there for 1.5 years, I think, and I started realizing that I've been doing all of these things, but I really didn't know how to do it effectively. I didn't know whether it was actually effective, whether it was having any kind of impact. And so this sort of disconnect between, and because I was trained as a researcher, I always sort of valued science and evidence and, the scientific method of, approaching things. So even though I was firmly embedded within writing and communication, which is mostly a humanities sort of subject in India, I still wanted to sort of apply a more rigorous way of analyzing and evaluating what I was doing. And so I decided that I needed more training. And that's when I decided to do a master's in science communication. And then I went to the UK, I did a master's in science communication. And it's there that I really got exposed to a lot of research and theory and frameworks within science communication and public engagement. And I actually worked simultaneously. As I was studying there, I also worked in many part-time jobs and volunteered a lot of places. So I really got a good opportunity to sort of practice science communication as well as learn about the theory simultaneously, and I could sort of go back and forth between the two. And so that experience of being in the UK and being able to both sort of simultaneously shift back and forth between the practice and the theory of science communication really sort of gave me an exposure to sort of how to do science communication in a more evidence way, in a more impactful way, in a more effective way. And so when I came back to India, I realized that there was a lot of science communication suddenly happening. This was about 5-6 years ago. And everybody was saying, oh, science communication is important and we should do this. And everybody was trying to figure out how to do it. But I sort of felt like a very acute lack of engagement with theory in science communication. And it seemed like a very esoteric topic. It seemed like something very, very niche and most people didn't appreciate it. And I sort of missed the ecosystem or the kind of people I had to discuss these things with. So I started the SciCommSci Club purely because I wanted a group of people which were also science communication enthusiasts or practitioners or even scientists or graduate students who could sort of appreciate the importance of theory in science communication and sort of use it to improve their science communication. So my agenda was to develop a community of people who could talk about evidence-based ways of communicating science, but also sort of learn about case studies and examples across the world. But at the same time, there was something in it for them also because they could learn from it, they could improve their science communication practice. And so it seemed like a good way because I was getting a sense of community. I was developing sort of groups of people to talk with and collaborate with. And actually the people I met at the SciCommSci Club, which includes Suchita, by the way, we have all worked together in various ways and many different things. So I think this sense of, I was very happy with the club because it really sort of successfully built a community of people who could talk. And I think the club hasn't been very active. It has been active in bursts and shifts, but not consistently, and because of COVID and everything. But what has happened is that there is a community of people that when I sort of reach out to, there's always response, there's always someone to engage with. And I think that's really important because it sort of develops a forum to exchange your lived experiences, your expertise, your whatever you have done in the past. And so I think that was my motivation for sort of starting the club. And I think the club was basically structured as a discussion forum to talk about the science of science communication, which is what SciCommSci stands for, so science of communicating science, or SciCommSci. And that's that. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. So let's get right into it, right? So how would you or would you not differentiate science communication and the science of science communication?
Sorry, can you repeat that? How would I?
So how would you differentiate or not differentiate science communication and the science of science communication?
Right. So I think one way to distinguish between them is to look at sort of practice of science communication, where you're writing articles or you're creating videos or you're creating podcasts. And the other way to look at this is to research science communication in some ways that you understand how to write better science communication articles. You understand how to make a better science engagement activity. You understand how to develop a strategy for science communication. But research in science communication or SciCommSci is not just about understanding how to do the practice of science communication better. It is much more interdisciplinary and multidisciplinary in some ways, because it sort of combines insights from disciplines like anthropology, from sociology, from communication and media studies, from decision and behavioral and cognitive sciences, to understand how can we tackle a societal problem. So let me give you an example. So we have a lot of misinformation that's very, very rampant and abundant around right now. Especially during COVID, we have seen there is so much information out there that you cannot really sort of fact check everything, and sort of, even if you are able to fact check and correct misinformation, the rate of misinformation is 10x more than the rate of correcting misinformation, right? So in some ways, the purpose of science communication is not just to transmit and translate knowledge from, say, a group of experts to another group of people who may not know about it, but it's also about developing skills, which is critical skills or rationality or skepticism in people, so that they can understand or be capable of understanding the difference between misinformation or pseudoscience and science, and correct information themselves, right? So it's not just about transfer of knowledge, it's also about equipping them with skills which enables them to make sense of the world around them better, which enables them to participate in societal sort of processes and democracies. Even democracy is better. So if people are more aware, are more scientifically literate, are more skeptical, are more critical thinking people, they can also engage in democratic processes better, right? So this entire, our understanding of knowledge societies as we live in, like India is a knowledge society because we are a democracy where we are trying to sort of, use information in science and technology to make human lives better, right? So how do we enable people to participate in this broader process? And it might seem like a far stretch from, we are doing science communication to actually participating in democracy, but you'll be surprised at how intricately connected all of these are, and how the downstream effects of engaging people with science better is so much that goes into it. So one way to differentiate between science communication and SciCommSci, or the science of science communication, is to think about practice and research, and that research could be one level meta, but it could, I think now what is happening in the global scenario is also that people are realizing that this practice and communication of, practice and research of science communication cannot be discrete entities. They have to be sort of fused together. And that is when Shweta introduced me, she said, I'm trying to explore the continuum of research and practice. And when I say the continuum of research and practice, what I exactly mean is that there has to be better understanding and engagement and partnership between people who are researching science communication and people who are actually communicating science, because they can work together to not only sort of improve how we engage people with science, but also the researchers can get a lot of questions or research themes to sort of work on. And so fighting misinformation could be one thing. Vaccine hesitancy could be another thing. How do you increase climate change awareness amongst people? These are all multidisciplinary societal problems, which science communication is just one aspect of it, but you really need to work with a huge set of stakeholders to properly solve it. But science communication does form a very important aspect of it. So I would say to think about practice and research is also about thinking how can you sort of implement science communication to solve societal problems. So yeah, I think
yeah. So your words and SciCommSci Club absolutely show that you are a strong advocate for the science understanding or the researching about science communication, right? So how hard or easy has it been to find people from your type? Are there enough people talking about it? I mean, you can give us a brief idea about the Indian scenario and globally.
Right. So I'll start with a little bit sort of with the background. So when I worked in the UK for a while, and when I came back to India, this is one of the most starkest difference I felt. A lot of people think that there are cultural differences and all of that exists, but in effect, the practice of science communication in India was sort of younger than as compared to the UK, but it wasn't that bad. There was a lot of things happening. There was a lot of diversity. But what was missing in the Indian context, and to sort of give a background to Suchita's question, was that there was not awareness about how to measure science communication, the impact of science communication, and how to develop strategies for communicating science, and how to make science communication more reflexive, right? So when you do science communication, you need to pause, you need to see whether it has had an impact, whether it has had an effect, whether it's actually effective, whether it's actually changing skills and knowledge and attitudes of people who it is targeted towards, and to reflect on this and then use this reflection to improve your science communication, right? So in very simple words, the importance of science communication research is to make your science communication more reflexive, right? Is to sort of take in a feedback loop within how you're doing science communication, and to sort of plug that feedback loop in an iterative cycle where it can constantly keep feeding back and giving you inputs on how to make it better. And that's how anything improves, right? So to answer your question, I think in India, it's not that people did not want to engage with these things or people were not sensitive. I think there was a lack of awareness of why it is important. And I think that was one of the core sort of mandates of the SciCommSci Club, was to sort of tell people that this is important, think about it. And I can't convince you whether you should do it or not, but just to put it out there that, hey, this is what, you should be thinking about. Here are some frameworks, here are some strategies, here are some sort of, structures that you can use to sort of evaluate your science communication. Here are some ways of qualitative and quantitative ways of measuring impact. And so evaluation and impact measurement is something that I keep talking about. It's very, very critical. And I see as of today, after the SciCommSci Club has been 2 years old, I mean, last week only we celebrated our second anniversary. And I think as of today, I see so many other science communication practitioners who are much more aware. They might not be using the term SciCommSci or research in science communication, but they talk about strategy, they talk about evaluation, they talk about impact measurement, they talk about stakeholder consultations, they talk about how it's important to, take care of lived experiences and incorporate that into your science communication. So all these small terms here and there are basically the ethos of science communication research, which is slowly coming into the Indian ecosystem. And I think it is really changing. And I am very, very happy that so many of my colleagues and contemporaries in India are sort of engaging with these in their own ways, in their own, and it's not because I have told them about it or the club has told them about it, but they have realized this in their own ways and through other people and through talking to other people. And I think that awareness is coming in. And I think because India's SciComm ecosystem is relatively young as compared to the West, it would be great if we can sort of enmesh the research and the practice together at this stage, because then we can really speed up and improve our science communication much faster. We don't really have to wait for 30 years that in the West, that it took 30 years for the West to sort of come to terms with the importance of research. But we don't have to wait for 30 years. We can do this in 5 years. And I think that is one of the most important mandates for why I'm trying to push this. So
you uttered the golden words for today's session on how we can actually speed up and improvise the entire scenario in India, right? So even Sarah Haider in our previous episode, she emphasized on how important their evaluation for Planet Evoke 91's project was. And it was an amazing discussion last time. So moving on further, so I want to talk a little bit about the scenario of policy structures in India. So you've been a part of most of the discussions and delegations for a SciComm policy setup in India, right? So at the systemic level, could you discuss a few policy implementations that can, speed up the progression of this career form in India?
Right. So because, so I must, before I go on and talk about how science communication ecosystem has developed in India, I must admit that we think that science communication in India has come up in the last 1 or 2 decades, but in fact, science communication as a practice has been happening in India for thousands of years, right? And this is something I can talk about when I discuss my course later. But so in India, in a formalized way, science communication as a field of profession, as a field of practice, has started coagulating only in the last 10 years or so. And a lot of research institutions, a lot of freelancers, a lot of people who actively engage in science communication as a recognized career in academia have started taking it up, right? So because it has happened in the last 10 years, there has been a rapid expansion of a lot of SciComm roles and careers. But what has not happened is that there has not been a sort of a deeper engagement with what are the roles and responsibilities of science communicators, what are the set of sort of mandates, how do we employ strategically, how can we do science communication. And so in addition to that, at the policy level, as you mentioned, there are not enough formalized positions in science communication. The career trajectories for science communicators to move from one career path to the other, or to sort of build up their careers, are not very well defined. So everybody who's a science communicator as of today in India are all sort of, mavericks who have sort of figured out science communication in their own ways. And I think this interview series I'm sure it's a testament to that everybody has sort of figured out their own career trajectories, and there is no defined career trajectory. But going forward, because we are, one of the first few sort of set of people who are doing SciComm careers, it is our responsibility to sort of define career trajectories, to sort of help develop an ecosystem for science communication. And by ecosystem, I mean physical infrastructure for doing science communication, which includes funding, which includes positions, which include research fellowships, which could include positions where people can actually sort of do science communication. But it also includes an ecosystem for training and capacity building, right? So how do we train science communicators? How do we train graduate students? How do we train scientists to sort of not just become better science communicators, but also appreciate the importance of science communication? And so we say that grant or funding bodies should have a mandate for science communication being an integral part of the grant requirements. But just doing that is not enough, right? We also need to supplement this with actual training and mentorship and capacity building efforts to actually train and sensitize people as to why science communication is important, right? So at the policy front, at the infrastructure and institutional front, both at the institute level, at the individual level, at the state and at the national level, we need to do a lot of these things. There has to be funding, there has to be positions. But one more very important thing, and of course research in science communication also sort of comes within this, but one more very important thing is the need for diversity, inclusion and equity in science communication. So a lot of the science communicators, including me, are from very privileged backgrounds, and we are here because we can afford to be in this position, because we had the luxury of choice where we did not really have to earn a living immediately, and we could sort of explore and take time off. So I think it's very important to sort of foreground people who may be from marginalized backgrounds, whether it's in terms of religion, caste, gender, sexuality, orientation, whatever it is, right? And so a lot of these marginalized communities have been, they wouldn't use the term science communication, but they have been doing sort of production and sharing of knowledge, which is a combined entity. They have been doing this for hundreds of years. And often we don't really realize that it is a form of science communication, but we need to put these people, foreground these people, and give them a platform to shine and for them to be able to do stuff, because these are the people who are embedded within the local ecosystems, and these are the people who can actually be change makers in their local communities, right? So I mean, I can talk about this more later, but I think there is a huge requirement for diversity, inclusion and equity measures in science communication also, in terms of making sure that the agenda for science communication is not just set by people like us, but it's also representative of every sort of socio-cultural identifier in the country. Because India is such a diverse country, it's all the more important.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for adding the last section where people usually ignore, or rather don't realize the importance of diversity, equity and inclusion in any role, irrespective of being science communication or even in academia. Right. So before we head on to the next section, I want to ask this question, which is one of my favorites, and also a lot of curiosity is there in the audience, right? So tell us how every day in your job looks like, and also you do a lot of these independent projects apart from your day job. So how do you manage, both these things, and how is your work-life balance? Yeah.
So sorry, the question was, how is my day-to-day sort of job like?
Yeah. So I mean, we're just curious to know how your day job works, and how does a day in your life look like?
Right. So there's a lot that I can say about this, but I'll start by saying that when I actually joined this position, and this is not really, I'm not really criticizing anybody. I think my job description was basically 3 bullet points, and it was very brief and very concise, that I had to do this writing, social media, website, and engagement, and that was it. So when I first came into my job, I sort of interacted with a lot of people, and I took like 2 or 3 weeks to write a job description for myself, because I was really used to a very defined and concrete job description in the UK, because I was applying for a lot of jobs in the UK. So I took, I think, 2 or 3 weeks to write a 3-page job description for myself. I sent it to my boss and I got it approved by him. And I think I've been following that since then, because in my job description, basically I wrote that these are the things that would be important for NCBS for me to do for NCBS. These are the things that I can do but are not important, but it would benefit NCBS. And these are the things that I would like to do. It has nothing to do with NCBS being benefited, but I would still like to do it. And I think all of them got approved very, very easily, because I was very sort of diligent in writing all of these things into these 3 categories. So I'll tell you briefly about what my job is, and then I'll tell you about the other things I do. Right. So my job in NCBS has changed and evolved over time, and so it's mostly organizing a lot of events, a lot of courses, workshops, conferences, symposiums, and these are not traditional forms of science communication, but these are events which allow for knowledge sharing and dissemination and translation and exchange. So in some ways, I still consider it as knowledge brokering or knowledge exchange. So these are events that I am organizing, which facilitates the exchange of knowledge between different kinds of people. They may be within science for certain academic conferences, but for certain science communication talks that we do, they are between people of different expertise and experiences also, right? So we organize a lot of these conferences and symposia at NCPS. I also organize a lot of public engagement events like science cafes and lots of science communication talks as part of my club and everything. So those are 2 things. In addition to that, I obviously take care of website and social media and developing a communication outreach strategy and designing a lot of creative collaterals, not just myself, but also working with other illustrators and content creators, writers, illustrators, artists, to sort of make science themed, outputs. And so I oversee all of that and I help them. Sometimes I contribute directly, sometimes I just supervise it. So it really depends on the project. Obviously, a core part of my job is to sort of feature the research that's happening at NCPS to the wider world. And this could be through website, it could be through social media, it could be through articles and illustrations, but it could also be through representing NCPS at different places. But in addition to that, what is something that I really wanted to do in my job was to engage in teaching and capacity building. So I've been trying to do a lot of science communication talks and workshops and sort of mentorship activities. And some of this has been part of the SciCommSci club, where I organize research talks in SciComm and I do mentorship sessions. But some of it has also been part of NCBS, where we have organized like 5-day workshops or maybe 1-day workshops, where I have delivered a lot of courses on, say, storytelling in science communication, or developing a strategy for science communication, or how do you sort of design a science communication activity from start to end. So various things like this. And this is something that I am really interested in. In addition to all of these things that I'm officially doing for NCPS, I'm very fortunate that I have the space and the freedom and the platform to pursue a lot of other things. Some of these other projects that I pursue include, say, research in science communication, contributing to policy efforts, as you mentioned previously. It includes really talking to a lot of people and sort of engaging in international SciComm sort of exchanges and activities and stuff. So this really allows me to not just learn and develop my own skills, but it also sort of allows NCBS as an institution where I'm employed to sort of be exposed to different kinds of, things that are happening around the world, and probably update their own understanding of what they could be doing. So I think I'll stop at that, because I can talk about specific activities later.
Sure. So, I mean, you've picked up a lot of points and takeaways for the audience in the last segment right now, right? Like how the roles are evolving as science communicators being associated with institutes, and also about having your independence and freedom to pursue other activities while you're doing your work at associated with an institute. And also there is room for a lot of improvement, right? So with that, we'll move to the next section, which I call the rapid fire or trivia round.
Sure.
So we'll have a bunch of questions to understand or know Sidharth better, and also see how he's going to perform under pressure. So let's get on that and let's get started. 3, 2, 1. Choose from one of the dream careers: SciComm researcher or science communicator.
So I have been a SciComm practitioner, but I now want to become a researcher, so I would choose researcher for now.
Absolutely. Okay. So ushering diversity, equity, and inclusion in SciComm is easier than in academia. True or false?
Sorry, say that again?
Ushering DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion in SciComm is easier than it is in academia research.
I think it is easier in theory, but in practice, it really depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. But because the ethos of science communication is pretty much making science accessible, I think it's much easier to sort of get away with a lot of things that would be difficult to do in academia, because you need lesser permissions, you have lesser bureaucracy to deal with. So I would say it's easier to do it in SciComm, yes.
Okay. On a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest and 10 being the highest, would you rate the SciComm community that is growing in India with respect to collaboration? How would you rate it?
I would rate it as, I think, 7.5, because I think because we're such a new and young community, there is obviously a lot of collaboration and taking help from each other. But I think there is so much more that can be done. And I have so many ideas of what should be done. So I will rate it as 7.5, which is just about, somewhere in between. Yeah.
Okay. So evidence-based SciComm is hard to practice. True or false?
It is hard to practice if you do not understand why it's important. It is not hard to practice if you realize why it's important. It becomes inevitable or essential once you understand why it's important. So it's not hard when you understand it.
Hey, you're trying to be diplomatic over here.
I will admit it takes a little bit more effort and time to get into it, but I think it's worth the effort and time to sort of get into it. So that's what I meant.
Okay, so you have to have a degree in SciComm to be employed as a science communicator. True or false?
Not at all. I started off without a degree in SciComm and no experience in SciComm. I just randomly started, reaching out to people saying that, hey, I want a SciComm job, and I actually got 4 jobs. So I think it's not required. Yeah.
Okay. What's the first thing that comes to your mind when I say pseudoscience?
Not being critical enough and not thinking for yourself, and falling prey to someone else's interpretation of what's right and wrong. Okay. Sorry, that was longer than it needed to be.
No problem. Would you prefer building the policy infrastructure for SciComm in India, or mentor SciComm enthusiasts who are just beginning to explore the field?
Given that I've been doing both, I think in terms of the long-term impact that in both of these activities, obviously the policy infrastructure has much more long-term impact. But I think personally, I feel mentoring SciComm people is something that I really enjoy, because I learn so much from the people I talk to, because they pose challenges and problems that I have not thought about, and it really gives me an opportunity to sort of expand my own thinking in that way. So I love doing the mentorship, but I think the policy stuff is more important in terms of impact.
Okay, go with the heart. Go with the heart. So, if there is any, what's one thing that you would like to change in your career so far?
I would have taken a quantitative course in social science research methods, because that would have really enabled me to translate a lot of my ideas or research questions in my head into actually, recognized sort of outputs in SciComm research. So that's something that I'm still sort of picking up as we go. So yeah.
Okay. Are there are there any few things that you do differently if you weren't formally associated with an organization?
Are there anything that I would do differently if I wasn't associated with an organization?
Yeah.
I wouldn't have to deal with any of the bureaucracy. So I would do a lot more passion projects and things that would bring me joy, rather than things that spark joy, to be honest. But
okay. Any quick book recommendation you have for science communicators to get started with?
Book recommendations. Oh my God, there are so many. Can I recommend a paper?
Okay.
So there's a paper by Burns et al. Which talks about science communication as a mountain climbing analogy. And I think I've spoken about this in my club, if you remember. And I think that is something that has really changed my perspective of how science communication should be done. And I think everybody should read that paper. Every science communicator should read that paper. It's like 10 pages, so it's not that long. Yeah.
Okay. So what was something you had to unlearn to become a science communicator?
What is something that I had to unlearn? That I am not the expert in the science that I'm communicating. I am just a person who facilitates a conversation between people with differing forms of expertise and experience. And my job is just to make these people be able to talk to each other in a way where they enjoy talking to each other. It's not to really sort of, convert the information and then translate it. I mean, that is, of course, something that science communicators do, but it's something that I had to unlearn, that I'm not really an expert in everything, and I need to be able to facilitate conversations more than actually understand everything that I'm trying to explain.
Okay, that's a humbling discovery. Okay, one last question. So, if there was an alternate career, what would that be, if not a SciCommmer?
Oh, I would definitely be a sociologist or a philosopher, properly a researcher in philosophy or sociology of science. Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in that. And now let's move on to the next segment of today to discuss one particular piece or work that Sidharth has worked on so far. And Shweta will head on to the discussion. Hey, Shweta, go on.
Yeah. Thanks so much, both of you. I had a wonderful time listening to you both, especially about science of science communication and also the super fun rapid fire. With that, let's move on to the thought process segment, as Suchita mentioned, and where today we would discuss about Sidharth's course on. Suchita, why don't you go ahead and screen share? I think you're on it. Okay. So we're going to discuss about the course, which is called An Inclusive History of Science Communication. So for me, it was very refreshing because I was also used to the Western-dominated sort of narrative about science communication, and this sort of course for which you have collaborated with Argaman on this beautiful sort of illustrations really sort of helped me learn a lot, especially about these cryodes and all these the history that actually went back thousands of years, and I had never really thought about it, especially when you also today mentioned about these people who were already producing and sharing knowledge. It wasn't technically science communication, but involving them really helps in sort of getting the science to the audience better now in the current times. So why don't we go ahead and talk a little bit about your experience in creating this course?
Right. So maybe I'll share my motivation for sort of coming up with this course. So as someone who's been trained in science communication, because I did a degree, I was always, when I was in class learning about science communication, I always kept asking that, why are all the examples from the UK or from Western Europe only? Why aren't there more examples? I remember one of my sort of instructors said that, we really don't know that much about, examples from outside of Western Europe, and this is what we have. But they did acknowledge my point and said that, of course, science communication is much more broader and something. And that's something that stuck with me in my head. And I kept thinking that almost all the courses, training materials, pedagogy in science communication, or even workshops and discussions in science communication, always sort of talk about science communication from a Western European English-speaking heteronormative very European perspective, right? Eurocentric perspective. And science communication has been happening all over the world for thousands of years, right? It's not something, sure, maybe the term science communication would have come up in Europe, but that does not mean that science communication, was invented or discovered in Europe itself, right? So I sort of, when the director of Lifeology, which is Paige, approached me to sort of do a course on the history of science communication, I said, sure, I would love to, but on one condition, which is that I want to focus on a more inclusive history. I will talk about the Western history for a bit, so which is why I think the first 1/5 of the course is just a quick recap of the Western history. But the narrative is structured in such a way that people are talking in the course about, and they discover that it's actually much longer. And so then I said that I will do this course if I'm able to sort of highlight a more diverse and inclusive example, especially from the global south. So this course, when I was working on it, it was actually a learning experience for me also, because while I was very aware that there is a lacuna or sort of a deficiency of examples from the global south, I didn't know that many myself, right? I knew a few here and there, but so I actually had to read a lot of research. I went through a lot of papers. Surprisingly, I found like about 10 or so, research papers on decolonizing science communication or, science communication in the global south and something, which actually had examples. So then I decided that I wanted to focus on three examples, one from Aboriginal in Australia, one from India, and one from South Africa, because these three are sort of like very well-known sort of cultures from the global south, right? So then we took I took all of these things, and then so because the course was in the history of science communication, I also had to talk about the models of science communication, because the models and how they developed in Europe were a very key aspect of how science communication and the thinking of how we should communicate science evolved. And so I did not want to sort of sidetrack that at all. So I got done with that quickly in the beginning of the course. But then I sort of explored into a more sort of leisurely sort of exploration of what it is to sort of understand. And so you can see a lot of examples in the course which are about, science communication practices in the global south, but they may not necessarily be called science communication, or the people who actually do it may not be thinking of them as science communication. But by definition and by the way they are done, they're still science communication, right? And so a very important point that we make at the end of the course is that we should not attribute the term science communication to these practices. We can say that there are examples which are very similar to science communication happening all over the world for thousands of years, but we should let people from these communities, and because I'm Indian myself, I think I could get away with saying that these are science communication. But the point is that it should not be that, people sort of exoticize that these practices as indigenous, practices of science communication, and then sort of use it to sort of, justify their own teaching courses and stuff. It should be that people from these communities themselves should be given an opportunity to sort of tell how it happened, how it should be taught, how it should be sort of engaged with. So in everything that I do, it's very important to include the people who are actually at the center of everything that we are talking about as a voice in the discussion. Sure, we can facilitate and moderate discussions, but it's very important to have the voices of people who are actually in the center of whatever we're talking about. And so let them sort of come up and use the term science communication for themselves rather than us appropriating the term for them, right? So that's one key thing that I wanted to focus on. Also, one more thing that I think was very important, which I wanted to sort of focus on in the course, was that there are lots of science communication models, including the deficit model, the dialogue model, the participatory model. And oftentimes people think that these are linear improvements over each other. But in reality, the continuum of SciComm practice is very, very messy. And all of these things coexist, and all of these things are important in different contexts. It really depends on the public, the objective you have, and the context in where you're doing your science communication. And all of these things can be chosen based on what is the context, but also all of these things can coexist together. A lot of science communication activities in India are actually a mix of all these things. So it's not that easy to delineate these models of science communication when you're actually doing it. So I think I also wanted to focus on that these models are good frameworks for us to understand and think about and reflect on how to improve our science communication. But in the practice of it, it's always a messy continuum, and we should acknowledge that also. So I think these are the sort of the two most important things that I wanted to sort of communicate through this course. Yeah. And of course, I must mention that this course would not have been half of what it is without Argya's sort of illustrations, because what I wrote was, I think 40% of the thing, the rest 60% just came to life because of Argya's illustrations. So a big shout out to Argya for the incredibly detailed and well-researched illustrations. I think he's done a wonderful job with it. So I must thank him. Yeah.
And yeah, I completely agree. I think both the illustrations and the words that you've written sort of complemented each other. So going back a little bit, you mentioned that there wasn't enough sort of history about the the regional science communication that was going on. So how did you sort of go about researching about them when there wasn't proper documentation, let's say?
Right. So in some ways, so for example, in the Indian context, I knew about the People's Science Movement because I have read up about it and I have heard people talk about it. So that I was aware of. The Aboriginal communities, I think I went down a rabbit hole on the internet and I just kept reading and I came across a lot of examples, but many of the examples did not really sort of adapt themselves well to the course. And so you will also notice that there is a narrative in the course which is going, and it has changed a lot while we were writing the course. So in some ways, we just had to look for examples, not just in research papers, but also blogs and, talks and abstracts that people have written in remote corners of the internet. So it took me about, I think, 1 or 2 months to just read up as much as I can. And then I picked like 3 examples. And so there was a lot of research that went behind it. And and also I must mention that this is just a primer to think about some examples of science communication in the Global South. There are so many more, and the course has like a very extensive list of reading list and resources, which I encourage everyone to go through if you are looking at the course. And the idea was that this course was directed at Western audiences to make them realize that there are enough examples of science communication in the Global South that they can sort of research and read about, and the reading list has a lot of those links. But it was also for people in the Global South like us to realize that we always don't need to focus on Western examples and case studies. There is so much in our own culture that we are actually entitled to talk about because it is our culture, and we should focus and highlight and sort of focus on these things more if we can. So it serves two purposes for people in different parts of the world, but to sort of make them aware that there are so many things. And this is, I think, 2% of what is out there. There is so much more that you can read more, but the format of the course is obviously limited, so we can only include very specific information because every card can only have 1 line or 2 lines, right? So we really had to work a lot in terms of compressing a lot of information, but also making it easy enough to read and be understood. So I often use a lot of social science jargon because I keep reading research papers and I have to remind myself that I need to use more simpler terms as a science communicator. So there is this constant conflict between the researcher and the practitioner in me to sort of, make science communication research also accessible. And I know it sounds very meta, but it's equally important to sort of apply your learnings both ways, right? It's not just from research to practice that you're applying your learnings. It also goes the other way, right? You can also apply learnings and skills and your experiences from practice to make the research more accessible. And I think the club is in some ways an experiment to do that de facto.
Mm-hmm. Right. Okay. So, what were your research learnings that now has what have you brought into your science communication practice from your research on this course?
Right. So something that I was very aware of in the beginning was to sort of include more people in science communication, in stakeholder consultations and everything. But I did not realize the extent to which our science and the practice of science in India and anywhere else in the world is colonized, right? So what this researching for this course, what it has done for me was that it really, really exposed me to a lot of literature and decolonization of science and science communication by extension. And so I have been really sort of trying to read up and learn more about ways of decolonizing science, ways of also using science communication as a way to question the norms in science, in the practice of science, like how do we do science? So there was an event that we organized last week about talking about religion and gender and caste. And so these are all sort of things that, I don't think I'm an expert in any of these things at all, but it has really motivated me to think about diversity, equity, inclusion in a more deeper way, in a more sort of focused way. And I'm trying to read up a lot of stuff in the decolonization of science and science communication, and I'm organizing a few talks and conference sessions next month also. So it has really opened up sort of an entire new sort of aspect of science communication that I have been aware of from a distance, but I've never really engaged with. And now I'm trying to educate myself and learn more. And it has also exposed me to a lot of people across the world who have reached out to me, I've had so many meetings over Zoom with so many people who want to sort of work together or work on something together. And it has just opened up an entire new sort of phase of what I could be doing with my skills further. So I think one of the benefits, as Suchita was saying before, of engaging in all these passion projects outside of your core day-to-day work is that it really exposes and expands your thinking of what you could be engaging in. It exposes you to new ways of doing new things and new initiatives, but it also makes you meet and network with a huge bunch of very, very interesting and capable people. And I think that's one of the best things about my job, is that I get to talk to people and learn from them on a day-to-day basis. And I think that has to be one of the biggest sort of USPs of being a SciCommmer, is that I don't have to bury my head in one paper or one subject and one test tube for the rest of my life. I'm hopping off like a butterfly, doing something one day, doing something else one day. And at the end of it, after a month or after a year or after 10 years, I can actually connect all those dots and make sense of something that most people would not have seen. So this act of connecting the dots, the emergent sort of insights that you develop because you're exposed to a breadth of interdisciplinary knowledge systems, right? Not just science, but outside science also. I think that is one of the sort of the most important driving forces for me to sort of do what I do is there's always something that I don't know. There's always something to learn. And there's always something to incorporate within my own practice and research of science communication. And I don't even know what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now. So let's see. Yeah.
That's a wonderful.
Wow, that was very well put.
Yeah.
Right. I think I got a little excited, but yeah, I hope you understand the enthusiasm.
Yeah. No, I totally feel you, because I think that's one of the motivations for me to do SciComm as well. And I can totally relate to it, because I didn't want to stay in the lab, but I wanted to go out, talk to people, see that awe when people had so many questions when they found out about something new. That's just amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So you also mentioned that you collaborate with people, you constantly go out there and make these collaborations happen. So how do these collaborations come about? So you said people just reach out to you and then you sort of talk to them and then these things happen, or
right?
Yeah.
So I think I have realized over the years that networking is something that I have really sort of figured out a way to network with people, and I think that's something that I do decently well, if I'm saying so myself. But I think networking is something that I tell everybody who wants to be a science communicator or even a scientist. I think networking is super, super important. Whether you do it through in-person events or social media, doesn't matter. But it is very, very important to network with people, and not just people within the same field as you, and not just people within a hierarchy of your field, so like someone above you and below you, but also diagonally, which could be people in a completely different field doing a completely different set of things. But sometimes when you talk to them and you engage with them, you learn something, or you learn to look at the same problem in a very different way or a different perspective or in a new light. And those are some of the best sort of the exciting moments of being a SciCommmer, is that you can really sort of integrate all of these insights and ways of looking at things, the ways of knowing, ways of doing, and you can put it all together and then figure out something completely different that nobody has. So to come back to your question, I think I consciously try to reach out to a lot of people. I follow a lot of people on Twitter. I write to a lot of people. I email a lot of people. About 10 to 20% of them will respond. But so, for example, in the last 1 month, I have spoken to like 3 researchers in science communication in different parts of the world, in different continents, and they've all sort of expressed interest that they want to do something. I mean, I don't know if it's going to work out, but the fact that I have established a communication chain with them, I can reach out to them about anything I want, and it somewhere down the future, in the next 10 years, something might come out of it, right? So I think you have to be a little bit shameless in reaching out to people and being polite and telling them that this is what I'm looking for, this is what I would really appreciate. Of course, thanking them and being sort of really polite and valuing their time, of course, and giving them an option that, would you be interested in talking about it? And you'll be surprised at how willing people are to talk and, discuss their ideas, even though there is like a lot of competition within the research ecosystem where people try to like protect their ideas in something. Everybody I've reached out to has always set up a Zoom call with me, has always talked about it, and I have learned so much. In fact, I have learned of new disciplines that I should be, looking at, or new things that I should be thinking about. So some of the things which I already said is decolonization of science, or using sort of science communication as a way of questioning science. And all of these things have all been a result of my conversations with different people. It's not something that I just woke up with someday and I realized. It's all like gradual learnings and, building brick by brick on what you understand. And sometimes a conversation with someone will spark something completely different in another project that you have. And so it just works. I mean, the human brain is... it works in that way. Like, you don't know what's going to spark what at some time. So.
Right.
Like, does that answer your question?
Yeah. So, networking. I get that. So maybe we could talk about networking in the question and answer section if you have any questions. So maybe last question from this segment. So how are you sort of evaluating the impact of this particular course?
Oh, so this course particularly? Okay. So this course, obviously, it's on a platform that I don't have access to, but the people at Lifeology can obviously look at the number of people, gather information about their geographical location, when are they accessing it, how long are they spending. So those kind of sort of internet-based metrics are always there. So those are quantitative metrics. But more qualitatively, I would say that I don't really need to submit a feedback form to give for people to give me feedback. People have reached out to me already in messages, in replies to my tweets, in emails, and in various different ways. And I consider that as a very important way of qualitatively impacting the course, right? So all the feedback, all the responses I get are also a way of, and there is a social science research method of sort of, rigorously using these qualitative inputs and analyzing them. So, I mean, I'm not necessarily doing that at this moment, but my point is that all the messages and all the replies that I get are also in some ways a form of evaluation. They're qualitative evaluation. So quantitative stuff is there on the internet. Apart from that, there is also a challenge associated with this course, which is to share a lesser known example of science communication from your own local culture or context or country. And so I'm hoping that will have a lot of responses and people will submit that. And that could also be a way of seeing that if people actually related to the course and felt compelled enough to share their own examples. And it's a 500-word write-up, so it's not like a big write-up. You can just write up in half an hour and send it off. So it's a very simple activity. That's one thing. I have shared this course on various social media platforms, on Slack groups, on email threads, on forums and mailing lists and stuff where I'm part of, on Facebook groups and stuff. And of course, there also you get a lot of feedback and stuff. So I think these are ways of evaluating that. But actually the long term, so this is evaluating the sort of the effect of the course and whether the course is reaching to people in different places. But if you would ask me about the long-term impact measurement of whether this course has had an impact, I would say I would look at the next 5 years where people actually start talking about if the practice, research, and teaching of science communication starts using examples which are incorporated in this course or something from the Global South. And if people cite us, I would say that is the biggest way of measuring impact, because it's actually changing not just people's knowledge, but also people's attitudes and people's outputs. So I think those are more long-term, more permanent ways of measuring impact, is that it's actually causing a change in people's way of engaging with these kinds of SciComm histories. So I don't know how to measure that, and I hope people will share whatever. So a lot of people have written to me saying that, can I use this for my course in my university or something? And I'm like, it's open source, it's out there on the internet, there is no cost involved. So you're free to use it as long as you cite it. So I think people have already responded to me saying that they want to use this in their classrooms. So I guess that is a way of evaluating it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Sidharth, for talking about it. And I really, really hope this sort of course propels more people to write about these histories, the lesser known history of science communication. And maybe you could also have a part 2 of this, because you said some of what your research didn't make it to the course. Okay, so then let's move on to the question and answer session. And the first question that we usually ask our guests is resource recommendation. So what is your go-to resource recommendation for people who are interested in science of science communication?
Okay, so that's great. So I was expecting you to ask me about recommendations for SciComm, which I thought everybody would have covered before me. So that's great. So in terms of resources for engaging with science communication, the SciCommSci Club website is obviously there to sort of list a few more resources. But I would say Google Scholar is your best friend. Just type in a few keywords about the kind of SciComm format or activity or event that you're doing, and you will find a ton of resources, research material, not just in terms of the theory behind what goes into it, but also case studies of similar activities that people in the other parts of the world have done. And many of these can be from the Global South also. So you can actually, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can actually learn about some of the challenges they had and some of the things that they could not do, and use that knowledge to sort of already input that into your planning and strategy development of your thing. So I think Google Scholar is one great resource. Forums like the PCST network or newsletters like the SciCommmer, for example, are great aggregators of relevant SciComm information. There are lots of social media handles about, similar to the SciCommSci Club. There is a SciComm Journal Club. There are lots of SciComm organizations across the world which sort of regularly sort of feature SciComm research. There are also lots of collectives which are training and capacity building organizations in SciComm, which are on Twitter and social media. And they have very frequent courses and mentorship sessions and workshops and conferences and even online get-togethers, or like just having like an informal discussion kind of a thing. So these are great resources to sort of engage in the science of science communication. But I think another way of doing it is to just reach out to people who are researchers in science communication and share with them what are your challenges of doing something. And they might actually be able to sort of suggest ways of making your science communication more rigorous, more evidence-based. So yeah, I think, but yeah, Google Scholar would be my top recommendation for just searching papers in SciComm. I mean, I do that on a daily basis, and there are some really, really well written. And so another thing that I would say is that some of the SciComm papers are really, really well written, and it shows that they are practitioners of science communication, because the way the narrative is structured, the way the argument is built, I mean, I feel like all science papers should be written that way. And I think the science papers which came out in the between 30s to 1960s where there was not too much of computational resources, obviously, are written much more elegantly. So if you look at papers by C.P. Snow, or you look at papers by Carl von Frisch, or papers by all of these classic sort of people, or even the discovery of DNA, or the Darwin's papers, they're all written in such a eloquent manner that I feel like today's research papers have started losing that kind of a flair for writing science eloquently and sort of engaging people. So I feel like that is itself a very important part of science communication, is to write your research papers also in a way that just intrigues the reader, and it's not just a dump of all the technical term, right? I mean, that has to be there to some extent, but it's also important to sort of build up the lead up to your paper should also, the introduction to your paper should also draw in the reader and make them interested in why you are doing this and why you're addressing this question. So anyways, yeah, I'll stop with that.
Yeah. Thank you for the useful recommendations. So I think a couple of times you've mentioned networking and how important it is for collaboration and also for getting some feedback. So what are your some of go-to networking? I mean, for people who are looking into networking, what are your sort of advices, and what has helped you in the past?
Right. So I think social media is definitely the easiest way to network, because it's a very sort of it's something that sort of breaks the hierarchy. So you can reach out to a top scientist or a top researcher, and they will still be another Twitter user. And it's not that, I mean, there is this inertia in writing an email, and it seems like such a big deal. But social media really sort of is a sort of level playing field in some ways. So I think that is a great way of networking. But I understand not everybody is very comfortable using social media, or maybe sort of willing to use it. So there are emailing lists, there are sort of online platforms, there are forums like the PCST network, where people sort of meet either physically or virtually, and they discuss these things. But another way could just be to talk to science communicators that you see around you, right? It doesn't have to be. So, for example, there are WhatsApp groups of science communicators. There is, in fact, a list of science communicators that Suchita, me, and Shruti of SciComm have been associated with, and that has a database of science communicators in India. And I think those are, again, ways of finding science communicators who are doing something similar or something that you're interested in. And it always helps to reach out to people and talk to them. And I think by far in India, the SciComm ecosystem is very collaborative. People are generally very willing to talk to each other and help each other. So I think you just need to sort of take the first step and reach out to people. And in terms of what has helped me, I think, just reach out to people and tell them that this is what you're looking for, and be very specific about what you want from them. Oftentimes, I get a lot of sort of requests or messages on Twitter or on other social media, where people just say, oh, we are doing this, we are doing that, but they don't really specify what they want from me. So while I appreciate the long message that they have written, it's very important to sort of be very, very specific about what you want from me. How can I help you? How much time it will need? And just be grateful for people to be helping you, right? And I think that just following that small sort of thing in your head, that you be specific about what you want from people, you respect their time, and you express your gratitude, I think that works wonderfully in any form of networking that you do. So as long as you can sort of stick to those kind of things, I think anybody would be happy to help. So yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I really hope anyone who's watching this chat today, or anytime later watching a recorded session, takes stock of how important these transferable skills are made in networking, trying and understanding how you can communicate better with each other, or also try and see how you can strike a chord with people who don't have the same background as you have, right? So I really hope this would be one of the most important takeaways people can take from this conversation. With that, we'll wrap up today's session, and thank you so much, Sidharth, for taking the time out for having this chat and giving us a little insight on how things have been with you and how things can get better and better every day.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, and it was lovely talking to you both and everybody else who's there in the chat. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for staying on for so long. And please don't worry if you've missed the beginning or the middle part of it, because it will be available on our LinkedIn page and our YouTube channel. Make sure you follow and subscribe our platforms so you get updates every week for our next upcoming episodes. And we'll see you all on the Ultimate Saturday with another new guest. Thank you so much. Have a good evening and have a happy weekend. Bye-bye.